Tēnā tātou, tēnei haura o te ahipo. E tika ana kia whakawātea tātou, kia tō mai, te māramatanga te whakaaru nui ki rungi a tātou i āta wānanga wēnei kaupapa nui o tātou hapu mō tātou iwi puta no te motu. Nā runga no i tērā. Mai te tupua mai te tawhita mai te kāhui o ngā riki mai te kāhui o ngā taniwha. Tawhiki ki ngā tua, tēnā i ana rangi nui ki runga ko papatū ānuku ki raro. Kaupare atu ngā kino te wā, kaupare atu ngā poke o te ahipo. Kia mahea te arataka tū o tāne whakapiripiri, tēnā i ana te arataka tū o tā whaki te wānanga, tā whaki te waiora. Unuhia tēnei te pau o tapu ānuku, tēnei te pau o tapu ārangi. Ka whakamau ki tai, ka whakamau ki uta. Ka whakamau turuturu, whakamau wā kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki. Kia koe Rahui.
Kia ora, nā mihi anō kia koe Jason, whakatūwhera tēnei o nā wānanga a ipurangi tātou e tau nei. Koutou, ko tūhono mai, ka mihi kia koutou, nau mai, hoki mai ki tēnei o nā kōrero. Ka tira, ka mihi hoki ki o koutou ko whakae nei te kōrero tēnei pō koutou toko whā. So welcome, this is second webinar tonight. 2 weeks ago we had Omicron, the webinar, and we got so much feedback that said actually we were trying to squash too much in a 2-hour session. So we listened and we've split it up, and tonight's webinar is talking with people who are involved in Marae, Hapu Iwi, thinking about how we protect whānau and the role that we have. This is complex conversation, and I'm really pleased that we've got tonight with us Tina Ngata from the East Coast. We've got from Waikato Taini, we've got Ikimoke, and we've got Rahui. Ka mihi ki o kōrua. Ka tira, Dr Elana Curtis is with us as well. And actually, now I'm gap filling because I can't remember who I was going to start with. My intention is to go to Tina Ngata. And if everybody nods, we're going to do that. We're going to start with you. Ka hoki anu, kia koe te tuahini. Kai a koe.
Te tika me tīmati tūrunga mai o te rā. So, yeah, tēnā koutou, aki rangatira, kua hui mai nei, i runga i tēnei kaupapa. Mai i tēnei mokopuna Ngāti Porou no reira, ko hiki rangi te maunga ko Waiapu te awa ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, ko ngā whānau, ko te whānau a tūwhakiri ora, te whānau a Hinerupe, te whānau a Karuwai, Ngāti Porowai, anō hoki ngā hapu, tēnā tātou. Yeah, thanks again. I'm really thrilled. The last webinar was really interesting as well, talking about our whānau plans. This is an area I think that is really I'm quite passionate about because there is a lot of support there now for whānau to be able to grow their plans. And as Jade mentioned, we're seeing a lot more whānau now around the motu who have their plans ready. There's also a lot of support for businesses to be able to do business planning. There's less support for marae to be able to come up with policies and plans and also to implement them as well. So the more support that we can provide, particularly to our komiti, our marae komiti around the motu, around these kinds of plans. And as Rahui said, it is quite complex as well. I think when we first started off, it was easier. The simpler days, it sounds weird, the simpler days of just the lockdowns where we could just easily shut things down. We've kind of progressed a little bit past that. Quite a few of our marae still are closed. I want to acknowledge that quite a few marae, here in Matakawa are still closed. But what we're also seeing is that, we've had a few instances for us here where I love the quote from Elana in the last webinar about this that we've also captured in the entry video, which is that it's actually about saving Māori lives. And marae do have a role in saving Māori lives, of course. In some instances, what we've seen is that saving Māori lives means staying closed, and in some instances, saving Māori lives has actually meant opening or being a little bit more flexible. And so then the questions around that are, what does that look like? And I guess for us, you know, what it comes down to is that there are some instances, and they need to be assessed case by case, but there are some instances where you close the marae and actually the damage is going to be worse because whānau will be having the same gathering, probably with a larger gathering, without any support systems in place, sometimes in very enclosed, you know, venues, and there's just a greater chance of spread in your community. And so if we could intervene and look at, you know, or provide support for all of those risks to be lessened, and if the marae has a role in that, then we were open to having that discussion. I'm going to do a quick share screen again for this, because it's we kind of utilized this for our whānau plan. I don't know how to, oh, here we go. And it kind of we looked at this kind of what do you call it, I don't know, decision making, whatever, visual, which kind of helps us to ask the questions at the marae level, which is, the first question is, can you eliminate it altogether, or is your decision going to relate to eliminate it? And that's usually, do we open or do we close? And if we close, is that going to completely eliminate the risk? And is it necessary in the first place to hold that hui? So is it a tangihanga? Because that's a really different level of consideration to if it's a wānanga, a whakapapa wānanga, or something that you could hold online, or something that isn't as necessary, in which case you could just say, no, sorry, we won't be holding that at our marae. But if it's a tangihanga, then that's another kind of level of discussion as well. And then if it's a tangihanga, how large is the tangihanga going to be? Are there other things that you can kind of do? So that's the kind of first level of consideration for us, is it even necessary? Is it a dire and important enough situation for us to open the marae in the first place? And if there's no other solutions, the second part is, what are the things, if we've decided that we are going to be utilizing that on our marae, utilizing our marae for this purpose, what can we do at the marae to make it safer? And that's where you start looking at things like, you know, having the moving your hākari space outside if you can, and yeah, having you know, spaced out areas, trying to create spaced out areas for whānau when they come there as well. Administrative solutions, kind of getting down the line, then you've got your administrative solutions, and those are things like having a whānau person who's in contact, if particularly I'm talking about tangihanga, because this is the only circumstance where we've considered this, but having one person who's working with the whānau pani, who, this is the last thing that whānau pani want to be dealing with, by the way. And that's the last thing they should be dealing with. So having a marae committee think about who could be the poutautoko for the whānau pani, so that they don't, in the middle of everything, have to also think about making sure everybody's got masks, making sure everybody's being COVID conscious. See if you can find a cousin in that group, in that whānau, or somebody who will hiki that responsibility for them and take care of that. But also, you know, looking at getting all of that information out to the community, that, yep, we have, you know, our taonga has passed, and this is how it's going to roll whānau. They get that out through social media, but also we can print some things available at the marae for them to understand how we're going to roll. And then it's the last of the things is that we, you know, that we can, it's important, so we always do it. But I just noticed that when people are talking about utilizing marae, whatever that might look like, it might not even look like fully opening the marae. They tend to just go first to, well, make sure everybody has PPE and that's going to take care of it. And even for us, we have RATS testing as well. And they go, well, can we do RATS testing? Like, that's going to, you know, RATS testing is not protective. It just helps you. It's detective, not protective work. So, and even then it's detective with flaws in it as well. So just, yeah, we noticed that there is a lot of, sorry, I closed that too early. A lot of people who tend to move straight to PPE, but there's a lot of decisions that you can make before that. And even before all of this, there's those early, like the whānau planning, talk with your marae committee and with your paipai, because what we've seen is that a lot of people square it away with the committee, but it's not squared away with the paipai. And it's so important to square it away with the paipai, because what we've seen is that the most effective communicator of what your COVID tikanga or ture are going to be is the paipai. If the paipai aren't masked up, your manuhiri aren't going to mask up. If the paipai aren't reminding them no haere-ru, then they're not going to remember, because they're too busy thinking about their mihi in their head as well. So making sure that your paipai are squared away with those ture, making sure your marae committee are squared away with the ture. And when I do say ture, I mean, you know, your marae ture, but be conscious that this is something that's also wound up in the ture Pākehā and ture Corona as well, the work and safety. So Safety in the Workplace Act 2015 does mean that all marae need to have thought about and be proactive in how they're going to protect people when they come onto the marae as well. So that places a lot of responsibility on our marae committees. So for us, yeah, just things like having that outside seating area. We had timed whakaike as well. So you only had 4 times that you can go onto the marae, which actually our ringawera loved that, because they were able to plan their meals accordingly. But yeah, just having a set amount of times that people can go up to them, go up to the marae, and obviously the number controls as well. And so yeah, those were just a few things that we wound up doing. And again, I'm not in any way saying that we should all open all marae, but that if you're going to, there's a whole heap of decision making that goes in before that, and some of that kind of early preparatory stuff as well. That, in fact, the early preparatory stuff helps our whānau to be prepared for when they do lose a loved one. They come with the expectations that these are some of the discussions that are going to be had as well. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to launch this discussion cold with whānau if they're not aware that this is how we now roll on our marae. So yeah, being open with your community that these are some of the things, new kawa and tikanga that you roll with.
Kia ora, ka mihi kia koe tina, wete tērā kōrero ka mihi. Ka huri kia koe Rahui, ka huri kia koutou o Waikato Tainui. Mā koutou, I should explain the rules, and I'm really ruthless. You got 5 minutes. Ikimoke's got 5 minutes. I'll interrupt. Kia ora, nau mai.
Kia ora rā wātu, e te rangatira nāu te tātaki o tātou karakia mō tātou tēnei ahi tēnei te mihi api o te ngaka. Koutou e ngā mātanga e ngā tautohito i roto i te ao hauora. Koutou kua whakawhaiti mai nei, i roto i te kupu whakamārama, i roto i te āhuatanga tuari kōrero ki o tātou whānau. Tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Whānau, I'm probably not even going to take the 5 minutes. I'm a man of few words, as nobody knows. But absolutely, the kaupapa is about getting the information out and getting the information out early. In 2020, Waikato Tainui came up with its own set of guidelines, not following what the Ministry of Health or the Prime Minister's announcements were following, but absolutely abiding it with the tikanga that we had learned from Te Poia in 1918, from Tāwhiao and the smallpox epidemics, from all of those things in the Kingitanga history have guided a strategy going forward. For example, at Te Paina in the when Te Poia was there in the Spanish flu epidemic, she had isolation units. Yes, they were raupo whare, but they were ventilated and they were set aside from the rest of the whānau. And so that was our isolation. And then in today's context, and Ikimoke will touch on this undoubtedly, the Amohiake MIQ that was established in Hamilton for that particular purpose, for those that couldn't isolate at home, had somewhere else to go within the near vicinity. We also set up, and I, through Ngā Marae Tōpū, one of the cultural committees that actually Rawiri has been supporting, and ka nui te mihi kia koe e te rangatira, because absolutely the information to our kaumātua settles the anxiety. They were the most anxious people that I've seen in a long, long time has been our kaumātua. And so they have made the dictation that the marae should remain closed, or if the marae does open, then the trustees, the committee and the whānau, alongside the paipai and all of the whānau, make the plan, and there has to be a dedicated plan. And so a number of those. Ngā marae tōpū also set up in excess of 38 pouarahi from the south of Auckland right through the marae of Waikato Tainui, all 68 marae, and regionalised into people that were, the phone numbers were shared and people could ring up and ask advice and things like that. And so keeping them involved in the information, again, with Rawiri and Ngā Marae Tōpū, with the messages coming out of John Whanga in the ministry, from the DHB and our whānau, our leadership alongside our providers meet every morning to be able to discuss those issues and get timely information out. We work under the principle and the tongikura that was established by Kingi Tuheitia, Amohiake Te Ora o Te Iwi. The health and well-being of the people is paramount, especially in these times. And so that's our premise, and that's how we attack it. On our marae, we have, even before it was a suggestion, we suspended hongi and hariru, and we instituted a karakia to cater for the tapu of the manuwhiri and the tapu and the noa of the tangata whenua, for example. And we had a little wānanga about teaching that karakia to all of our marae. And so that's become a new age tikanga and a new age kawa. The aspect of waving, or you got the East Coast eyebrow lift, and you've got the pai Māori they wave, and you've got the every iwi has its nuance, and that is working really really well, and we've had no sort of complaints in that area. The timings of the whakaeke is something that has been adopted in the main, especially at tangihanga, especially at profile tangihanga. Like we've got one of the originators of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa lying in Te Awamutu, and following those sorts of things. The majority of our tangihanga, though, are being held at home because it's easier to be able to police and monitor a number of those things. There are some marae that will allow the karakia whakamutunga on the maho and then taken to the urupa for internment. For example, I agree with all the sentiments. This is not just a physical thing. This is a hinengaro thing as well. And so kia tau te wairua e ora te tinana koira te tino kaupapa o tēnei mate whakawhiu i a tātou. He mate whakapōrearea i te hinengaro. He mate whakapōrearea i te tinana. But it's become something that's so prolific and rife that almost every whānau in communities are experiencing this aspect. So there are a number of things, working with the New Zealand Police, the Ministry of Health, and all of those aspects, but also bringing our kaumātua together to wānanga about tikanga going forward. So, and totally support all of the wonderful mahi that you professionals and providers do, and my absolute mihi goes out to those on the ground. As Terina Moke from Raukura Hauora said, the snag is to not burn out our wonderful people out there on the ground. Kia matara, kia maia koutou, and me manaki tahi a koutou. So amohiake te ora o te iwi is not just about those that get COVID, it's about those that are supporting all of the kaupapa, with kai packs, with health packs, but with karakia packs as well. Nō reira, pai maari re ki a tātou. 4 minutes 59, Rawiri.
Kia ora, amohiake te ora o te iwi, ka mihi, tātou, tiaki nei i a tātou, ka tika. Ka tira kāhuri ki a koe Ikimoke, kai a koe mō tētahi 4 minutes 59 seconds and counting.
Rira tēnā tātou e te whānau ai. Kei tautoko ngā kōrero e kōrero tia ki a koe Jason, tēnei te mihi, o tira ki a koe Tina, tēnei te mihi anō. it's appropriate that our maituakana Rahui goes back in time and brings us forward to the future. So I'll take us into the future, being the taina. And so Rahui talks about all of the different initiatives that we have experienced in life, especially through our tupuna whaia, te puea. We now come into 2020 where the foundation was laid, the tikanga was laid in the tungikura of Kingi Tuheitia, amohia ake te ora o te iwi, ka puta ki te whaiao. That one tungikura shaped the way that Waikato was to respond to its people, to ensure that the well-being of our people was paramount. So that gave us an opportunity to then take the clinical advice and still uphold our cultural or our tikanga advice and come together and try and find the best balance, to try and balance everything, because we knew that we were going into some uncertain times, and we knew that our tikanga was about to be challenged. So then from 2020, March 2020, with tangihanga guidelines, through to 2022, they look totally different now. Now that we've learned more about what we can and can't do, but also now that we have completed the different initiatives like vaccination, it gives us more of we can now see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're getting nearer to the end of the tunnel. So now we're able to then look at the clinical advice currently for Omicron, and then take the tikanga advice from each and every one of our marae, and then try and find the best guidelines possible to ensure that we're not creating more trauma through tangihanga for our whānau. So it's really, really awesome to have that now with our response now with Waikato. I think in Waikato, we're lucky that we have been infiltrating the system for many years, right back to the time of Te Puea. So we've infiltrated the Waikato District Health Board leadership, and that's been a huge advantage for Waikato. We've infiltrated even positions within the Ministry of Health. So then with that infiltration on the ground from Waikato Tainui and also Tainui Waka Alliance, it gives us an opportunity to respond specifically for our people, and also able to advocate our guidelines as well. Yes, we've taken on board the Ministry of Health guidelines and all of the clinical advice that's provided to us, but we still must uphold tikanga somewhere. We know that tikanga, we can rely on tikanga to get us through with our people. So now moving into the future, we have to now start to understand, how do we bring our people back together? We've got whānau that are vaccinated, whānau that are not vaccinated. Right at the beginning, we were reminded that the virus is the issue, not the people. So now it's time now to bring our whānau back together, where vaccination or not, does not divide us as a whānau, does not divide us as a marae or as a hapu. So now we have guidelines that allows unvaccinated to attend many of our kaupapa. Tangihanga is a good example of that, particular times for unvaccinated. That then gives us an opportunity to keep our kaumātua safe, and then adjust all of our tikanga accordingly. But we must never ever forget now that we must bring our people back together. So I'm a stickler for keeping to time, Rauri, so I'm happy to finish off my kōrero in 30 seconds. We continue to uphold amohia ake te ora o te iwi ka puta ki te whaiao, and we will continue until we reach the end of the tunnel, which is not too far away. Awesome work out there with all of our Māori providers, community providers of Waikato, of Tamaki, of the Mutu. And big ups to everybody to get all of our Māori through. And like everybody has said, all Māori lives are important. We will ensure that we save all Māori lives as much as we can. Nō reira, pai mārere ki a tātou.
Kia ora, ngā mihi ki o kōrua. I was reflecting in the earlier webinar tonight that it's 2 years since Urutā stood up. That in that time we've been going continuously, and there's more work to do, clearly. But it is interesting to kind of notice the changes that have happened, and one of the issues that activated us was concern about the original information that was being provided about tangihanga. And so, ka huri ki a koe, Elana, this is an area of work where you were really active, and we spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out what's the right advice that's really going to support our whānau. And Omicron changes everything, but ka huri ki a koe, kai a koe.
Kia ora tātai, he mihi mahana tēnei ki a tātai. Ko Elana Curtis toku ingo no te arawa hau. Kia ora mai rā tātai. Thanks Rawiri, and thanks everyone, and Tina for your very wise advice that you've been giving out, as well as everyone else that's spoken so far. Yeah, I think I spoke at the last seminar about how really a lot of my time in 2020 was arguing for the sort of assault that happened to our people when we were shut down in level 4 with absolutely no, really very limited options to even get to funeral directors, and that what that meant for our wairoa and our ability to do tangihanga. I think at that time there were things that could have been done, there was science that could have been listened to a bit more, and I think that was too heavy-handed. And then I've talked about my flip, and more recently, particularly this year with Omicron, etc., but even back in Delta as well, and actually just getting really, really concerned about having anything on the marae. So it's just been a moving feast, and I just want to acknowledge everything that Tina's brought up, because I think it's so nuanced and it's so difficult to get your head around. We created the mantra saving Māori lives when I was in at AFS, and that was really about trying to get our headspace shift, our hinengaro space shift around. We're not doing really in-depth contact tracing management anymore. We needed the services to flip to the fact that, and there's a comment there that Papaarangi is going to talk to, that actually we can't do case contact tracing if people don't have a phone, don't have kai in their whare, and they actually just can't do the basic things to survive. So we flipped the model around putting manaakitanga first and welfare first, etc. And the flip now for our marae is how to flip themselves around, keeping ourselves alive. So that's probably sort of where I was at the beginning of this year, and now I think really getting behind Marae and Marae Committee, it's a bit too simple, as Tina's been pointing out, just to say shut. It's very complex, but everything has to go based on what your resources are, what you've got available to you, and yeah, I'll probably start talking back to my whānau Hapu Iwi around a more nuanced response as we're in this surge. My little challenge would be that I don't think, whilst I want us, we should all be together, I would just say we're still like hovering around the peak. People are having rats tests that they're not recording. We don't quite know whether we're at the peak or just slightly over or slightly under. It's not quite the time to bring everyone rushing together to gather. I think we have to be pretty cautious still as we're in this surge and ongoing. But hopefully the flip to saving lives helps us understand what the reality is, what the priority is, now for us, I think, and it's still a priority at the moment. So I might just leave it there and let everyone else have a kōrero as well. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, thanks Elana. We said that we're really going to turn it over to the question and answer part of tonight. So people, whānau, if you've got questions, you type it into the Q&A part of it. We've got people who are going to type answers, and I've got the question meister next to me who's going to pick out some of those questions and turn it back to the panel for a conversation. My advice to the panel is to speak in bullet points, not in paragraphs.
Kia ora. Yeah, I want to pick up on Tanya Eden's question in the Q&A. And it really picks up on what Elena's saying, that COVID is not just happened to us as one disease. It's actually been like different waves of different types of diseases, and we're in different spaces being vaccinated or not vaccinated, etc. And so, but at the same time, while we're talking about tangihana and marae and iwi, Tanya reminds us that many of our whānau are in quite desperate needs and means, and are having difficulty just with housing. They're living in motels and don't necessarily have the resources to go to help with isolation, etc. And so she's really looking for some advice on that. Now, I'm quite aware that actually things are being done differently in different areas throughout the country, and what's happening in Auckland might not be the same as what's happening down with you, Tina, or Sue Kringle, what's happening down south. So I was just wondering if we can talk about how people are being supported in emergency housing, etc., in different places in the iwi, or in different iwi and different rohi. So maybe you want to start with Auckland story, Elana, if you know how people are being helped to isolate here in Auckland.
Yeah, kia ora Papaarangi. It's really difficult at the moment. There is just limited resources available for everyone. The systems are falling down. MSD is not coping with referrals at the moment and have sort of almost turned that off because they just can't cope with the backlog that they currently have. And so what we actually need is for whānau to put their hands up as much as possible to connect with Māori providers in their rohe and try and seek help through that way. We're all very concerned around that, even within Auckland, but even more so for some of the other regions who haven't got a Māori regional coordination hub that we've set up here in Auckland. But my advice is to put your hand up, please go to Māori providers who have may have some solutions, but though hopefully they've got some providers who have something on the ground, and we will try and link whatever we can up for whānau. But yeah, very limited resources, and now the safety net of MSD is struggling, and so we're in a state of high emergency really around welfare support, to be honest.
Tina, have you got anything you want to add? I'm coming to you after that, Ikimoke.
I guess, you know, so we're fortunate. We fought very early to get an SIQ here for whare kahika, and we have managed to get an SIQ for whare kahika, so we do have alternatives, and we don't have that issue for us, but we do have quite a few whānau who have reached out to us from the cities because they're still our kasis, they're still mokopuna, they still know their hapu, so they're still reaching out to us. And I would recommend that, you know, I think that that's a valid thing to do. We're happy to receive comms from whānau and city, and because of our networks with other iwi and hapu providers, we're able to link them up with the relevant iwi hapu provider for where they are. So we're okay for mokopuna, kasis and whanaunga to do that, reach out to us, and then we link them up with the provider where they are in their township.
Yeah. Ikimoke, how are you coping with people in emergency housing in Waikato?
Yeah, we definitely see now our rise of the need for isolation alternatives for emergency housing. When we went through our Delta outbreak way back in October now, and of course Delta moved a lot slower, so we could provide accommodation accordingly. And so we entered into a partnership through Kingi Tuheitia, Waikato Tainui and the DHB, and we opened up our community isolation quarantine called Amohia Ake at the Distinction Hotel. That was formerly a managed isolation facility. We were able to take over that and say, well, actually, no, the need is for our community isolation. Therefore, we need to open up specifically an isolation alternative for our whānau. So that worked well for Delta, and I think by the time we got to just before Omicron, we were very close in stamping out Delta. I think we were only at a active 100 cases. However, then in come Omicron. And because of the outbreak, it came in so hard and fast, we then had to change our triaging system. And my colleague here for Maranga Yare, Dr J Tamatia, will support in what that looks like, our triaging system. Now we concentrate specifically on the 5%. So we have a triaging system that concentrates on 5%, 25%, and the 70%. And Jade will be able to explain more if you needed any more explanation. Unfortunately, with Omicron and the numbers that we're experiencing, because we only concentrate on the 5%, these are the people with the high health needs and support. So it limits us now to provide more alternative isolation for those within emergency housing. We're starting to see many of our kaumātua come in. They need to have clinical oversight. We're seeing a lot of our hapu mama come in. And we've also reached out to a lot of our other regions because we know that not many have a CIQ alternative. So we've been able to reach out to Tauranga. We've taken in a couple of referrals from there, Te Arawa, and also elsewhere. So we've got a contingency plan to also support the motu, because Kingi Tuheitia also reminded us, if the motu needs support, support them. How you do that is totally up to us. So we've got a contingency plan within Amohia Ake, which is now being relocated to Hamilton Jet Park Airport Hotel. And that's working really, really well, especially in and around the 5% high needs triage system that we've created.
Yeah. Paul, I don't know if you can highlight Sue Kringle, who's also zooming in from the South Island. And Sue, I just wondered if there's anything that in the way in which people in the different parts of the South Island are coping with whānau who are in motels or in managed accommodation, so emergency housing.
I'm not sure about what's happening with the emergency housing, but I know that we have, you know, the DHB and the PHO have got, and the Māori providers and MSC have got their mahi going on. Ngāi Tahu, Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu has recently stood up a call centre so that people can call in, and they've got networks into all sorts of resources where they can support people to get the assistance that they're requesting. And Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu is also supporting the Runaka as well, and because of course the Runaka is dealing with whānau as well. Maya, have you got any information around emergency housing?
I think it kind of highlights a fact, and I think Jade's mentioned it in terms of that actually we've got a whole lot of issues, and we've got a housing crisis and a poverty crisis, and now we've got an Omicron crisis on top of it. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted all of those major issues that we have in our society. We also know lots of evidence in terms of that that Māori are affected, that it's worse for Māori in terms of poverty, in terms of intergenerational issues and the consequences of that. So certainly Omicron and this is a highlights and seeks out and thrives in poverty, which is one of the reasons why all of our Māori providers, our iwi, our Māori groups have been advocating, and indeed Ureta have been advocating from the very start and will continue to do so. I suspect that there we have seen pockets where we could see our system change, and we dealt with homelessness overnight and got everyone housed into a hotel. So I think there's lots of issues here. So that's not an actual answer, but just kind of, I think it highlights that we that there's all of these things, that when there's a motivation, actually we can find solutions. And in the meantime, we've got a whole lot of people, Rahui, we've got people, Ikimoke, we've got Tina making and finding solutions to try and cover up the holes that are left there in our system. I wish I could say that homelessness was dealt with, but but it's not. And it is indeed an issue nationwide. And there are Māori people trying to find solutions, trying to help whānau, probably not getting the funding that they're supposed to get, but doing it because that's the manaaki and that's all we can do.
Thank you. Rahui, I want to come to you for another question that Tina's started to answer. I don't know if she's finishing it, but I wanted to come to you and really ask, how can Marae reassure manuhiri that we're safe enough to come to the hui, especially if we've chosen not to mandate, but that our processes are safe?
Yeah, so for some of the examples, and really tautoko the crisis kōrero, the bullet point though is not to look for the Crown to come up with the solutions. We must be adamant that we have the solutions in our hands, and we must advocate for our own solutions. As it relates to manuwhiri coming on to the various marae and various gatherings, that's where the principle of manaakitanga comes in my view. It is our obligation to look after the manuwhiri and to follow the maxim of amohi ake te ora o te iwi. And so having those clear guidelines, having those resources at the marae. And so Waikato Tainui has equipped all of our marae with those relevant resources that have come from our providers, that they have said, this is what the marae needs. As far as looking after our manuwhiri, it's the processes and procedures. So, for example, when you walk onto a marae, any marae in the country, you are in the hands of the kawa of that marae, and the paipai tangata whenua, or the paipai of that marae, has the obligation to make it absolutely crystal clear these are the expectations of the home people, and the ultimate goal is to keep everyone safe. For example, there are some areas where there are pōwhiri for those that are vaccinated, and there are certain times where unvaccinated people can come onto the marae. The aspect of deep cleaning, the aspect of sanitizing the whole marae, the aspect of keeping at a distance is absolutely relevant. And those are just a few of the things, but it's absolutely the obligation of the paipai and the tangata whenua to exercise the highest duty of care for our manuwhiri on the marae.
Okay, so we don't we don't tell people that they're safe. In fact, we tell them that, yep, we're going to do all of these things. We're going to do everything we can to make it safer, but there is no safe in this context. And we're for our the way that we've rolled with our tangihanga and everything is that because one of the things is that it's people tend to think, well, we've got it all covered, they don't have to do anything, but it actually is incumbent upon the manuwhiri, as Rahui pointed out, to make sure that they do everything they can as well, and we want them to be cautious. It's kind of like that little thing where you don't give somebody too much painkillers because you want them to be a little bit cautious. You want them to feel a bit of pain so that they don't go running around. It's kind of like that. You need to be upfront with whānau around the fact that we can do everything. We can do the RATS tests, we can put the cones up, we can check for vax passes, we can make sure there's no haere-do, we can, and you can still catch it because you've chosen to open the marae. And that's a really important, upfront, honest and transparent discussion that has to be had with the marae committee and with the whānau that are asking you to open the marae for multiple reasons. One is that whānau need to be informed about the risks that they are choosing to take in coming to the marae, but also just to help them be a little bit more cautious if they when they are on the marae as well. So yeah, the answer to that is we don't tell people it's safe. We tell them that there's still risk.
Yeah, tautoko, sorry. And one of the other factors that I'm sure we all are cognizant of is the online factor, and having that accessibility for people to stay home, but also participate and not feel guilty about not showing up in person.
Yeah, kia ora. I'm sorry, I was muted before that, so Rawiri acting out his fantasy to shut me up on the best of occasions. So we'll just leave it at that. Jade, I don't know if there's a question from Patricia Pera about how would you assist the individual to continue maintaining their practices within their own spaces and, health practices, I'm taking it. And I don't know whether that's the home, but you could start with there, and then we'll ask the other speakers to talk about it at the marae and hapu level.
Dr Papaarangi.
Yeah,
so in the space of isolating, I guess it's a really great moment to stop and think about all those different aspects that we want to keep ourselves well. And I think sometimes with the ngangara, we get very focused on how to medically stay well, how to physically stay well, but of course ensuring that our hinengaro is being challenged and used and working, our wairua is so, and we've got all those other aspects happening is just as important in isolation. I think just building on what you were saying there, Rahui, there's a lot of online ability to still do that even when you are isolating in your whare. And I know for us back home, we've got our early morning karakia now online, and that was a really useful way for us to start the day while we were in isolation. with Uncle Tom, a great way to sort of remind us to all get up and get out of bed every morning and have a set day and a clock and a time, but also just to set ourselves in a way where we would feel toe and feel safe. So I think while it's really important to think about it at a hapu and a marae, and I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say there, it is really important at a whānau level when we're isolating as well to have that balance. And we were talking before about, you know, you have got your COVID booster, got your health booster, but it's really important to have your wairua booster as well through these times. So kia ora.
Yeah, did you want to add to that, Elana? No, okay. Tina, did you want to add to that? Oops, you're on.
It's been answered wonderfully.
Okay, and did you want to add anything, Ikimoke?
I suppose alongside of all of our tikanga, we look to all of our tungikura o whakatauki left behind from our tūpuna. Rapua ngā mea ka ngaru. You know, look back to those things that we may have forgotten to do. And this is the wairuatanga coming through. You know, e toimaha ana, haere ki te wai. That's a huge whakatauki here in Waikato. When you're feeling unwell or burdened, go to the water. And of course, we have our Waikato awa here to replenish us. So I think for wairuatanga, we definitely have to start encouraging a lot of our whānau to look back to all of those taonga tuku iho to help lift our wairua.
Rahui, did you want to add anything to that?
Okay, I'm interrupting, but just to be clear, whānau, you've got about 5 more minutes. If you've got some questions and we've got a really interesting panel who can answer and we're ready to type in, you've got 5 minutes. Type it into the Q&A. Over.
I guess if there is one thing I would say about the use of tikanga and kōrero is that we have found it really helpful for some of our whānau who, you know, as a toolkit, we are gathering it as a helpful toolkit for whānau to be able to access these things while they're isolating as well. So, you know, we've had some reports, you know, for whānau who have found, for instance, māramataka very, very helpful in, you know, being able to keep a sense of time and keep some scheduling going as they move through that. And we also have a lot of whānau who are very interested in the role of rongoā. It's really important for us to not, I know there's a lot of discussions around rongoā in particular and the role that it could have with relation to COVID. And I feel quite strongly that if we avoid that conversation, that it's more dangerous than leaning into it. So yeah, I know that there's the whole, you can't kawa your way out of this, and they're quite right, you can't. Kawa tea, if you choose to drink it, please make sure you have lots of water as well, because it is a diuretic and can dehydrate you further. So, you know, that's just one example of why it's important for us to probably lean into those conversations so whānau aren't making decisions in an unsupported way around our mātauranga. Bye.
Can I interrupt again? Of course I can. So just to be clear, whānau, there were some really interesting questions which I thought actually tie into one of our webinars that's coming up on Wednesday night. We've got a webinar that's looking at kura, and we're thinking about tamariki and schools open safely and things like that. But we've got another webinar where we're really trying to focus in on some issues for Māori providers. That's Māori health providers, Māori community providers. We need to have a conversation too. So those two webinars, you register for them now, and they're on Wednesday night, 6 p.m. or Wednesday night, 7:15.
And the recordings?
Yeah, we're recording this webinar. We're going to edit it so that it's not 1 hour long. We're going to have some bullet points, and we're going to put that on the website too.
Okay. And I think we've got no more questions.
Okay, so if the questions are done, and there might be some more coming in now, as soon as I say it's done, you start typing, guys. But it's incumbent on me to thank everybody who's been part of this panel and helping us. And so that starts with Uruta. We've got to acknowledge Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga and Whittle here for supporting this work. There's a bunch of people who are on the panel and have been answering the questions and supporting us. And that's Sue and Jason and Jade and Maya. Eruera, I want to mihi to you. Anthony's over this side of the room. And then our panellists tonight, Tina, Elana, Rahui, and Ikimoke. Ka mihi ki o koutou, koutou I whakarangatira nei I a tātou tēnei pō, me wā koutou whakaro, me wā koutou whakawhiti kōrero hei tautoko I te iwi, ka mihi ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, ka huri ki a koe Jason, mā haupe tēnei te whakakapi te hui nei, kia ora tātou.
Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou ko tai mai ki tēnei wahanga whakamusua. Utunga o tēnei hui a topa nei. I te rere hua o ngā whakaaro, I te rere hua hoki o ngā kōrero. I tikana nā runga no I te tapua ngā kōrero kia hikitia, kia whakawātea tātou. I runga no I ngā tikanga o tātou nei mātua tūpuna. I runga no I tērā kia tau ngā manaakitanga o te wāhi ngaro ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia māhea te hua mā kihiki. Kia toi tū te kupu, toi tū te aroha, toi tū te reo Māori, toi tū te whakaaro Māori, toi tū te tino rangatiratanga. Ka turuturu, ka whakamau wā, kia tīna. Tīna. Haumi e, hui e.
Ai ki e.
Tēnā tātou.
Okay, we've got a couple of videos we'll close out. Thanks for joining. Everybody remember to register for the next one. Kia ora.
Ana tamanui te rā e ki runga I a whaira wae Heke mai ko te marangai Wai puketia Ngā tiriti o te motu E te tangata e ki Ka whiti ana tamanui te rā e ki Maranga kia mau kia ita Heru nui, heru roa, naru wai moko te runei ha. Kia hakarongo te ao katoa, wahe katoa te pā. Tirohia ngā whenua, tirohia ngā moana, tirohia ngā tangata, wariro atu rā e ki. Ka whiti ana tamaru I te rā e ki. I a whaira wae Heke mai ko te marangai Wai puketia Ngā tiriti o te motu E te tangata wae ki Ka whiti ana tamanui te rā e ki Paranga kia mau kia ita He au nui, he au roa Nā tangaro a te au nei ha Kia are te ao katoa Kua he katoa te wā Me hoki haka murira Ki ngā kupu o rehera Toi tū te kupu me te mana Toi tū te whenua Daram 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 bum bum Ba-da-dum.